this one is from a networking thread on Reddit, and it is titled Telecommunication Mess Recommendation Thoughts and Suggestions. So, this person works for a mid-sized manufacturing company. In looking at their network telecommunication invoices, it appears like a mess. So they've got AirSpring, AT&T, CenturyLink, Frontier, Global Capacity, Level 3, Metcom, Rogers, Spectrum, TWC, and Verizon. Every month spending around $60,000 for landlines, trying to switch to Teams and reduce as many lines as possible. Any suggestion on how to approach this and negotiate pricing, or any vendor recommendation who can look into what we are paying and review this? Appreciate any pointers and feedback on this.
Man, I guess there's a lot about that question where I'm like, we should have a deeper conversation with this person. Can we track him down or something? But I guess to start, it doesn't sound like this is a what I would call like a modern or a transformed network, and I just base that off some of the vendors' names that I hear, right? So Level 3, for instance, you know hasn't existed as a standalone company in quite some time. Um, they were purchased by CenturyLink, which is rebranded to Lumen. So when I like hear these questions or go into these conversations, I'm just listening to be like, okay, like when's the last time they looked at this stuff holistically? Sounds like it's been a while. In general, this is probably stuff that they've kind of built up over the years. Um, for us, and for this person, I think the thing I would advise them to start with is getting. It sounds like they've got a good list of vendors. I would start by looking at what all the services that they're delivering are and at which locations. So you've really got to get that and normalize it into something that is off of their invoices, is site associated, so that you can have visibility for what you actually have out in front of you to start with. Um, that's not only going to impact their ability to make decisions right now, but as he talks about moving to Microsoft Teams, you're going to need to have the visibility in that to understand, like, how many users do you actually have? How many landlines do you have? What's it supporting? Likely, based on what he said, there's some sort of kind of legacy voice systems that they would be migrating from that are on premise, which isn't even included in the list that he sent out there. And the other thing is, in a manufacturing environment, another important consideration when you're going to Microsoft Teams is what sort of hardware that will Teams support, and are you going to need to work with a third party to do so? Specifically in a manufacturing environment, there's likely kind of life and safety type things, whether it's alarms, elevators, door door access, um, uh, type things, paging, overhead paging systems, very likely in a manufacturing environment. So there really is a lot to untangle. He is spot on. Um, for us, and I would say for him, the approach should really start with getting detailed visibility over everything that's there. And you do that by sitting down, and this is a tedious process. You do that by sitting down with those invoices, and Excel, or partnering with someone that does this, and getting all of the services that are out there, normalized so that you can see them all. I think that's really where it starts.
So to maybe dig a little deeper into his question in regards to negotiating pricing and vendor recommendations. So let's put him in. Let's give him the the key to getting full visibility as you're speaking about. How should he think about pricing and vendor recommendations?
Yeah, so as far as vendor recommendations, those are going to be driven by requirements, right? So as he gets that visibility, he's going to need to, if he or she doesn't really understand what's going on at each of the locations, they're going to need to talk to, whether it's office managers or branch managers or whatever, about how they're using the voice systems at those locations. I think the gotchas on this are, and I mentioned it some in the last answer, but moving to Teams in a manufacturing environment, there are likely things that are being utilized in those branch locations that are utilizing the voice system and the voice infrastructure that are not related to essentially user-based calling, right? Which is what Teams is about. It's about a named person with an Office 365 account being able to call either internally via the Teams architecture, or externally via PSTN access to another person. In a manufacturing environment, oftentimes there are things at each of those locations that are supported by the voice infrastructure. And so they will need to understand what those things are at each of the locations, what the requirements are, and whether or not they're willing to, change them. Will they work with Teams? If they won't, many of them won't, right? Like Teams isn't great at that part of this. They're very, very good on user to user type voice communication and video communication. But I would say the gotcha there, and where they really need to start on vendor selection is understanding what all is being delivered via the voice infrastructure today, and do not make the assumption that it is, user to user type calls. That will drive the vendor selection. And then, your real options here are, you can do it with Teams or with Microsoft. They can have, depending on your licensing, you may already have some of the components included. And then you can buy a la carte other pieces. So whether it's the phone SKU, which is included in E3 and E5 licenses, but if you don't have those, you may need to buy that a la carte, and then calling plans. So you can do it with Microsoft. Likely you are going to find reasons not to do it with Microsoft based on being a manufacturing company. So your next option is to use what's called a direct routing partner. So this is a third party that has integration with Microsoft Teams. Your end users, wouldn't really know the difference depending on the level of integration, but most of them have native integrations. Your end user would know the difference. As an admin, the systems work pretty well together. So generally easy to admin, and you can get like Active Directory and single sign-on type integration between the two systems. And then, the way to look at it, one of the first things that drives it is where all your locations at. If they're all domestic, I think that really opens up your options. If they're international, your options start slimming down pretty quickly, because not all of these providers offer local dialing plans in all of those regions. This is also a gap in Microsoft's capability as well, as they don't have as many of the international locations. They don't have local numbers for those available. So you're going to drive it, just, I guess, kind of recapping, driving your initial vendor selection is going to be driven off of, your core requirements. Assume that it's not just user to user communication. Assume that you have some sort of hardware in this manufacturing environment that needs to utilize voice infrastructure. And then off your region, kind of where all of these users sitting. If it's all domestic, you've got, a pretty large list of people that can do this. If it's international, that list starts to slim down a bit. You need to look at all the locations that you have and map those to the locations that the direct routing partner can support. And from there, you're slimming down your list and choosing who's a fit. You can use certainly you can use advisors like us, or you can go to any of the well-known kind of ranking sites that are out there for list of voice integrated Teams systems. I think there's there's the place I would maybe watch out for a bit is, I think there's a lot of kind of white label and second and third parties delivering some of this stuff, whether it's MSPs or whoever else in here. I would tend to go to a provider that is and has been doing this for a long time and has built up the infrastructure to do it, and it's not something they're hosting in an unreliable location, I guess I would say. You really want to evaluate the architecture of the hosting provider.